This week's episode of the Dark Room Podcast presents the Villisca Axe Murders. Murder. So yun, bagong episode sa ating programa.
Bagong episode sa ating series.
Oh, medyo nagiging strict natin to ha. Third episode since nang nagbalik tayo nung ano.
Yes. Kasi
Murder. Saan ba yan?
Sa TikTok.
Sa TikTok.
I give you murder. You this, no. Wala lang na. LSS ako. Hindi. LMS.
What LSS? Hindi na makanta yun.
Last meme scene.
Ikaw ba yung nag-ano?
Ako yan nag-ano. Ngayon ko lang naisip. Duman.
Nag-coin?
I coin. Ito yun. Talo.
So yun, simulan na natin tong episode natin to.
Wala nang patungkik. O hindi, o nga pala, si Sir Kenneth baka makapanood nito. Nandito siya sa Ormoc na yun. Nasaan kaya yung ano na yun?
Ewan ko nga yan, nag-chat kagabi, nakatulog na ako.
Oo nga. Anong oras na nagsabi
nag-chat
nandito?
alas 10 ng gabi.
Nandun daw siya sa mamihan.
May curfew.
Hindi ko alam kung saan yun, nasan yun ngayon. Parang kaya na kayo magkita.
Wala may pasok tayo. Ay, kayo pala.
Baka mamaya magparamdam na naman yung curfew na.
So, yan.
Let's go.
Tangina mo yung mutot dito. Mutot pa sa gilid eh. Sa Gedli. May mutot sa Gedli.
When 8 innocent people lost their lives in a single night, the usually uneventful, quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, changed forever in June 1912. The perpetrator viciously murdered the Moore family and their two house guests with an axe. Suspects and confessions.
Without asking.
Without asking. With an axe. It's on the spot. Suspects and confessions have come forward. Even trials were held, but ultimately, the person responsible for the barbaric crimes remains unknown. Now, more than 100 years later, the Villisca Axe Murders remains one of the mysterious cases in history.
So, ano na kaagad yung ano natin, no?
Meron na kami mga pa-intro.
May pa-intro. Or dun lang sa nakunan.
Kung makita tayo ang ginamit ito, sigurado mamamute tayo nito. Okay. Located in Montgomery County, Iowa, Villisca boasts a population of around 1,100 residents as of 2019. Back in the late 1890s and early 1900s, Villisca was a thriving town with a close-knit community. Although there are only 2,500 residents in Villisca, it was a hub for developing businesses and a magnet for local tycoons who were eager to capitalize on the area's growth. It was a quiet town, interrupted only by the regular trains which passed through. In addition to many businesses, Villisca was also featured a National Guard armory, funded entirely by the local residents, the first of its kind on US soil.
So medyo ano din tong
sila base.
National Guard. Diba yun yung mga parang levels ng sa US?
Parang before sa military sa
parang National Guards.
When Villisca still possesses
yung ano tawag doon? Homeland Security
nila.
Ba't maraming division ng parang sa nila doon?
Sobrang dami kasi na. I think from police, tapos na aamoy ko na yung kanin natin.
Naluluto na ba? Sakto lang yan.
Sakto lang yung natin. While Villisca still possesses the same small town charm and appeal it did over 100 years ago, its legacy is forever tainted by the events of June 1912. To this day, the Villisca Axe Murder continue to haunt the small town. Its effect are soon into the fabric of its history and never seemed to fade even with the passage of time.
So, tawag dito? Rural na
Oo nga, tsaka
yung place na to.
Sinasabi dito na parang walang happenings talaga.
Walang ganap.
Walang nagaganap dito.
Walang ganap sa
Except sa meron silang National Guard Armory, pero hindi naman yata parang ano to eh. So,
well, parang mostly sa mga ganitong mga cases sa mga rural na mga area na
wala talagang katao-tao.
Ay, hindi naman ganun, hindi naman sa walang katao-tao, pero like
Kulang yung kulang yung populasyon.
parang ganun yung nakikita mo sa mga horror shit or sa mga trailer ng mga
Na parang
yung mga
yung mga cabin in the woods na style,
parang cabin
na parang
in the
yung
woods,
mga bahay,
yung malalayo yung mga lugar.
Yung space ng house is
parang sa tawag dito yung the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, di ba yung
lawak ng lugar.
Malayo yung mga lugar. Ganun.
Parang ganun din sa Courage the Cowardly Dog Show yung
yung parang parang ganun yung yung dating ng usually
mga
ayun yung na-imagine sa lugar nila. Moving on.
That
Wala
time,
lang.
more than 24 passengers and freight trains stopped at the depot each day, and the town sported several hotels, restaurants, stores, eaters, and manufacturers. Within this thriving environment lived Josiah B. Moore, one of Villisca's most prominent businessmen. The owner and operator of the Moore Implement Company, a John Deere Company franchise. He was a solid competitor.
Yan, di ba?
John Deere. Parang sikat yan na.
Parang motor something. Hindi ko alam.
He was a solid competitor with other area businesses. On December 6, 1899, Josiah married Sarah Montgomery at the home of her parents, and the couple would have 4 children: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul.
Yung walang naisip yung tatay mo sa last name niyo. Pinangalan yung lugar niyo.
Baka sila yung pinangalan. I think
sa kanila nang galing
sa kanila nang galing yung pangalan, Montgomery. Parang dito yung Apple Street, nandiyan si Dog.
So 4 yung anak nila.
Pero bakit 8 yung sinabi? Titingnan natin. Mystery. Bakit 4? The Moore family was well liked throughout Villisca and gained a reputation for being generous and kind. They were a church-going family who maintained strong contacts and good relationships with many in the community. However, Josiah had a number of enemies in both in his personal and professional life. But not again. Parang nag-negative.
May ka agad eh. May tawag dito? May yun nga, parang negative ka agad eh. Mabait sila, pero sila.
Merong mga kaaway. Hindi, yung negative, yung sa mga crime documentaries.
Kaya nga.
Ngayon,
mag-iiba ka agad yung mag-iiba yung
yung video, magiging negative. Wait, nag-click na yung kanin namin.
Luto na.
Yung meron na pala silang mga, nga pa. Meron na silang mga nickname. JB, siya yung
Justin Bieber.
As Josiah was familiarly called, and his wife Sarah, just Sarah, were well liked in the community, active in Presbyterian church, and described as being friendly and helpful to their neighbors until on Sunday, June. Until magna-negative yung itsura ng yung opposite. And then on June 9, 1912, the Moore family were as well as the Stillinger family attended church. An annual event was also held Sunday evening called the Children's Day Program, which been coordinated by Sarah Moore.
So talaga sila? Kaya sila si Mandy?
Parang lola yata nila eh.
Lola nila si Mandy.
Lola ni Mandy itong family nila.
Wait, there's more.
Oh. Lola pala. Fun fact, lola nila. Lola ito,
Ni Mandy. Mandy Moore.
Mandy Moore. Having joke. Hindi pala. Malinkat. That evening, 9-year-old Catherine invited her friends. Ay, ito pa kaya pala.
Kaya
12-year-old Lena Stillinger and her sister Ina May. Ina mo. In a sleepover. The girls accepted, and after the program ended at 9:30, the Moore family, along with the Stillinger sisters, walked home from the church, arriving 9:45 or 10 p.m. Between 9:45 and 10 p.m. The Moore family, along with two Stillinger girls, left the church and made their way back to the Moore's home as the evening set in. It was a late night for the youngsters, and after milk and cookies for supper, everyone present in the Moore home retired to bed. Ito na.
Early retirement.
Ito na yung sakto talaga. Yung saktong mag-blur na yung yung
may ano to may dito, may B-roll ng may B-roll lang.
Kagandahan natin. None of them would be seen alive. Jong. Yun na pala yung dapat eh. Ito na yung
Pinapangunahan mo yung script natin.
Yung script natin. Sakto pala yan.
Yung pinipaint dito na typical lang din yung yung Moore family, and also active sila sa church. Ay. Take me to church. But yun.
I think sa business to more on business competition.
Wala pa tayong medyong hint kung
ano nangyari sa kanila.
Kung sino or kung ano.
Pero alam natin
yung motive pero yun na yun.
Come morning around 7:30, the usually vibrant Moore household was strangely devoid of activity. And the local
siguro lang sila. Dito, late na nagising.
Oo, kasi tulog.
Late na
oras? Alas 10 na
Alas 10. Wala na.
Nag-suffer sila alas 10.
After nilang nag-suffer, they suffered.
Oh. Dinner and suffer. Wordplay. Yan. And the local neighbor, Mary Peckham.
Si Maritas.
Mary Peckham. The Maritas took notice. Kasi parang asan na yun?
But yung mga typical na mga sa neighborhood na
Ba't
wala pang gising sa kanila?
Parang saan kaya? Baka umalis yata. Wala nga mga sweldo
Wala pang nagwawalis doon. Anong oras na? Alas 8 na. Yun talaga si Sarah kasi mapera, may negosyo.
Hindi na maglilinis. Yung mga chismosa.
Alam mo ba?
Uy, kasi pa yan.
May nagkakape dun, di ba?
May nagkakape. Pati kayo yung isa nagwawalis
yung isa, syempre. Yung mga marites naman. Ng mga lugar-lugar.
Nakita nila yung curtains were still shut, and none of the 8 occupants has come or gone on their morning routines. Mary called Josiah's brother Ross, who came to check on the household. Dito na si Marites tumawag kaagad.
Tinawagan yung
si
kapatid.
Ross.
Josiah. Si Ross.
Tingnan mo yung bahay.
Yung kapatid mo?
Asan ba yung kapatid mo? Nakichismis ka. Umalis ba sila? Nagbakasyon ba
kasi late nang umuwi.
Yun na nga.
Sabi din.
Nakita namin. Alam yung mga bata, pinapauwi na. Then he arrived around 8 a.m. and he let himself in through the front door. He first inspected the downstairs bedroom, and to his horror, gawa na lang. Out there.
Yung squeaky door.
Tapos, Josiah. Sarah. Tapos, dang.
Papasok. Yung mga radio show before. Papasok na ako sa pinto. Bubuksan ko na yung pinto.
Nung nakita,
pagbukas ko ng pinto,
ako nakita ko si Josiah at si Sarah.
Yun kaya yung gawin natin. Alam mo yan, sa podcast, ganun yung ginagawa nila. May ano talaga.
Parang
Meron parang
first
reenactment
person.
na dun sa mga nangyayari.
Pwede naman, pwede.
Pero may mga voice actor sila eh.
Mas, yun yung maganda.
Maganda yung
Or
ano
di
nila.
kaya anin natin sila, yung mga katrabaho natin dito.
Nakakapagod mag-edit.
Ayun lang. And he,
Ano?
ayun na, Ross found 2 blood-soaked sheets covering 2 corpses. They were bodies of Josiah and Sarah.
Bodies on the... Let the bodies on the bed.
Then Ross called the local marshal and told him that something was up. Something wrong has happened. Marshal Henry Horton arrived on the scene 30 minutes later and thoroughly searched the Moore house. He found a dead body in every bed, along with a blood-covered axe laying in the room where the Stellinger girls lay dead. The entire Moore family and their 2 friends were brutally slain.
The allies has been slain.
Isang palakol.
The enemies has been slain.
Savage yun eh. Savage plus triple kill.
Yeah.
Yun na. Then, what he had seen was shocking. The entire Josiah Moore family had been murdered. Nasingit ko yan as well as the 2 young overnight guests, all bludgeoned with an axe while they slept. In the upstairs master bedroom lay 43-year-old Josiah and 39-year-old Sarah, both bludgeoned in their head. Their bed
Ano,
linens.
ba't may discrepancy dito? In the upstairs master bedroom, 43-year-old. Eh, dito nasa ano sila?
Nasa downstairs.
Nasa downstairs room. Well, that's crazy.
Crazy.
That's crazy.
Direct edit mo na lang.
Pa, ito to, may discrepancy din sana sa nakuha natin.
Nagkabaliktad. Nauna yata nakita yung
Baka dalawang ano yung
May basement
kwarto
pa yan.
nila eh.
meron pa yata.
Tatlong
I-excuse namin yung ano.
Okay. Gagawa tayo ng excuse dito sa
Baka
author na ano.
baka si Ross yung pumatay.
Oo. Tapos nagkamali siya.
Nagkamali
Sabi,
lang.
nasa babang bed.
Oo, tas sa taas pala. So, paano mo nalaman na nasa taas? O nasa baba? So anyway, moving on. Their bed linens were stained heavily with blood. In the adjacent upstairs bedrooms were the more children.
Kaya nga, dalawa may taas pang bed.
Okay. I
Kaya
think
may parang tatlong levels yung bahay.
Tatlong levels yung bahay nila. Mary Catherine, Boyd, Paul, had been bludgeoned in their head while they slept. In the main level guests were the Lena Stillinger and her sister Ina were also found dead, killed in the same manner as the family. Isang ano lang sa
Siyempre mga bata to eh. Ikaw ba naman?
I think
ano?
inuna yung dalawang matanda tapos mga bata.
Tira ka ng calling axe eh. Delete ka.
Sad! sa mga nanonood na nga. So, Villisca City Marshal Hank Horton arrived quickly and in the meantime, the gruesome murders spread like wildfire within no time.
Kaya nga, kasi nandun sila marites sa labas.
Nalaman ka agad.
Chinismis ka. Yan ba pinatay doon?
Pakasa ka agad Marites kay
Kasi CCTV.
Jun
Kapano pa ng ano, ng mga damit.
naka-robe
Naka-robe pa.
kanina. Nakatambay kami sa labas.
May kibang bata dito.
May
Facial ano.
yan yung chichansu.
Ano?
Chichansu pa. And
Nakamas.
neighbors and curious onlookers converged on the house. Law enforcement quickly lost control of the crime scene, and it said that as many as 100 gawkers, went inside the house before the Villisca National Guard arrived around noon and cordoned off the home. Wait,
Dumating yung
So,
national card.
parang ito yata yung isang isang pagkakamali ng authorities. Parang meron na tayong red flag kasi pinapasok nila yung maraming tao eh. Baka yung yung pumatay dun, pumasok rin tapos yun parang may ginalaw or may para mawala yung evidence. So, baka lang, hindi natin alam. Kasi merong red flag, bakit nila pinapasok yung mga tao?
Umabot ng 100 yung nasa loob.
Sobrang laki yata ng bahay nila. Paano yun? Museum na, uy, pasok kayo, labas naman. So, mga talaga, ang daming tinawag ni Marites.
Si Marites yung si Marites.
Marites talaga yung
Pero may nangyari dun kaila JB. Alam mo ba yun?
pinatay daw sa...
Pinatay sila Sarah.
Naku. Alam mo, yan talaga may mamapapera. Nalalapit sa mga kasama. The investigation that the 8 victims were killed shortly after midnight. All but Lina Stellinger were thought to have been asleep at that time of their murders. It was concluded that Lina was the only victim that attempted to fight off her attacker, as she appeared to have a defensive wound on her arm. The attack was so vicious that the ceilings in the parents' and children's bedrooms showed gouge marks apparently made by the upswing of the axe.
So grabe talaga yung pag gano'n yun, tumatalsik yung mga dugo.
So, may intent talaga na matay.
Baka yung killer was already inside. Hinihintay niya lang yung family para.
Kasi nung oras silang umuwi.
Pinatulog lang sila, na doon lang sila nakatago.
Yung yun, parang binantaan talaga. The axe was found in the guest bedroom, indicating that the Stillinger girls were the last to be killed. It was bloody, but an attempt.
If sila yung last, bakit hindi nakaalis si Lina?
I think
baka natakot na talaga siya.
natakot siya.
Doon lang siya sa kwarto nagtago.
I think nakatulog na yung iba, so wala kang may rinig. Except
Hindi, maririnig niya naman yung yung
baka malaki kasi mga 100 nga yung nakapasok sa I think mga nakakwarto na sila tapos
soundproof.
sa pupunta yun.
Siyempre kayong mga konting movement lang pag siyempre.
Baka maririnig. Kaya si Lina, I think si Lina lang yung nakapansin. Then nahanap pa rin siya. Napatay pa
Hindi
rin
magkasama sila nung kapatid niya.
Oo nga.
Sa isang room.
Oo.
Paano kaya yun? Hindi niya ginising yung kapatid niya. Uy.
Baka nauna siya. Tapos
Siyempre sisigaw
baka
na.
nauna yung kapatid niya.
Kaya nga, sabi hindi daw siya natutulog Siya lang yung gising.
Kasi siya yung, baka nanlaban siya pero
Kaya nga, so
nung siya,
hindi, baka nung pinatay yung kapatid niya, nagising siya.
nagising siya tapos siya na yung last. Sumigaw siya, so umingi siya ng tulong, tapos wala na.
That's what she said.
Oh.
Too long. Oh!
Tulong, the title of your sex tape.
That's the title of the sex tape, Too Long. 9.
May season 8 na pa yan. Nung August pa. The axe it was a bloody but an attempt to check the axe belonged to Josiah, and all of the curtains in the house have been drawn. 2 windows that didn't have curtains have been covered with clothing. All of the victims' faces were covered with bed linens and clothing after they were killed. Other evidence showed a pan of bloody water that was discovered on the kitchen table, as well as a plate of uneaten food.
So kumain pa siya dun.
Lakas ng niya, ng
Tapos nawalan siya ng gana. Parang yung yung
sa Japanese.
Yung
Miyazaki.
Miyazawa.
Miyazawa ba yun? Miyazawa sa Japan.
Family murder.
Family murder na. Pa.
Yung lang sila dun, nung kumain pa dun sa
bahay. Tapos nag-iwan pa ng mga damit. Lakas ng all of the victims face out. No one could imagine who could possibly commit such a heinous crime, and the townsfolk were first convinced it must be a deranged tramp, expecting to find
si Trump.
Expecting to find the blood-drenched killer hiding somewhere in the area, a number of posses were formed on horseback and in autos, searching alleys in the city and every barn, shed, and outhouse in the vicinity. But they returned empty-handed. So meaning ano talaga, hindi alam ng killer yung ginagawa.
Nakatago ka agad.
Tsaka,
Or na malapit lang siya.
malapit lang.
Hindi siya nahan.
Si Ross,
Yung bucket of water, baka doon siya
naglinis siya.
Hindi siya kamay. Tapos kakain muna ako. Tapos, wala na kumakain.
Hindi niya naubos. With darkness came the fear that a madman was on the loose and might strike again. Families partnered with their neighbors to stand shotgun guard all night, and windows were nailed shut. In the ensuing days, every lock in town was sold out. Residents openly carried weapons.
Tumas pa yung tumas pa ng sales nung
I think parang
padlock.
mga padlock. I think kagaya ng nakita mo yung
Annabelle yung yung horror na.
Yung horror na Annabelle. Kasi I think during those times, ano pa nga yun 1980s na yun Parang hindi sila mahilig
magsarado ng mga pinto.
Mag-lock ng mga pintuan. Tapos yun, napasok sila sa mga nakapanood.
Pinasok si
sila.
Annabelle. Pumasok si Annabelle.
Pinasukan si Annabelle. Okay. So yun, I
Hindi
think
ko pa ata napanood yun.
yung may buntis. Remember?
Hindi ko pa napanood.
Bakit? Nakakatakot. So yun. So ito, I think sobrang alam nila na
Well, kasi naman, di ba na-mention dito, ito yung parang
rural
first na nangyari to.
yung nangyari sa
So, syempre, yung mga tao doon is tawag dito, kampante sa lugar.
Kampante.
Walang naglalak dahil.
Walang naglalak or hindi natin alam baka kasi wala rin kasing parang sinabi na merong break-in makapasok, wala. Yung mga windows inanuhan lang. So
Kaya nga, kasi nga, hindi nga sanay silang mag-lock So,
baka
malaki yung chance. Sumalis sila,
tapos
tapos
si Ross,
pumasok.
sinabi din yung kapatid niya nakapasok lang kaagad.
Kasi may susi si Ross. Sa isang article na nakita ko, may sarili
Siya.
may spare key. Yung yung
Kapatid.
neighbor nila. Oo, dun sa isang nabasa ko.
Parang spicy yan. Bakit sila may susi?
Di ba parang uso yan sa States, ganun? Yung mga neighbor pag umalis, please take care something. Tingnan niyo yung bahay ko. Di ba pag nag-out of town,
Hindi ko alam. Parang
ganun yun dun sa amin
dun sa inyo sa States.
Sa state of Dulag.
So yun. So natakot na yung mga yung community. They soon newspaper reporters and private detectives flooded the
Dito
street.
pa, like, nagdadala sila ng mga open carry ng mga baril. Well, tawag dito? Kasi nga, dahil sa
Kampante nila, tapos carefree.
Ganun.
Tapos itong nangyari na, parang yun nga kasi talaga parang hindi ka na mag-iingat kung hindi mo pa
Yung wala pang nangyayari. Parang ganun naman talaga yung like, parang tawag dito. Nagiging pabaya ka lang kasi wala pa namang nangyayari.
Neighbors look upon suspicion upon neighbors, and rumors and accusations ran rampant. Si Marites na naman
Gawa-gawa ng kwento
gumagawa ng mga kwento. So, yun, dumating na yung mga newspaper reporters to report the crime, to yung story. And bloodhounds were brought in, and law enforcement agency from neighboring counties and states joined forces. The murder began in the beginning. A chain of events that split the small town and forever changed the course of the lives of its residents.
Ooh.
One of the earliest thoughts by investigators was the possibility of a serial killer The previous year, a series of horrible murders had taken place in the Midwest. In the fall of 1911, every 2 weeks, whole families have been slaughtered in their beds without apparent reason.
Parang may ito dito.
Merong
May mga connections na
pattern, no?
So possibly din to, di ba?
One of serial killings.
Serial killing din.
This included the families of the Burnhams, yung and
pwede.
the Wayne, mga ancestor ni Bo.
Si to,
Si Bo.
lola to ni Bruce.
Ito si Wayne. Hindi, ano yun ano nga pala Wayne?
Si Bruce Wayne.
Naisip ko si Bruce Lee
Bruce Lee. Layo.
In Colorado Springs, ang layo ng China sa... Chinese ba si Bruce
No,
Lee?
Chinese.
Asian. Yellow. Uy!
Oh, Ching Chang Chu. Oh, ano ba?
In September, the killings, ito the Waynes, the Burnham, and the Monmouth in Illinois. 2 weeks later, culminated in the murder of the Showman family in Ellsworth, Kansas. And on October 15, the next
Ito to eh.
October 15, 1912.
Di ba uso pa dati yung mga yung mga dito? Yung mga
Ikaw
slaves ganon.
Oh.
So tawag dito sa sa last nito, yung family na sa Ellsworth. Tawag nung yung tawag dito.
Mga tao.
Nung slave nila, yung master showman.
Oh. Yung kaya yung mga ancestor to ni Herman Moreno eh. The next year, another similar murder occurred in Paola, Kansas in June 5. In just 4 days before Villisca.
So, what if kung isa tong diba, chain of serial killings na lang? No? Nagtataon na siya para pumatay.
Oh, baka lang.
Or parang ang tawag dito, parang na lang sila na ginagaya nila, parang gano'n.
Or parang yun, meron
Or possibly din to, malaki yung chance na
isa lang yung
gumawa nito.
Just yun nga, I think serial killing to. Part siya ng serial killing. Pero
like hindi rin ata eh, kasi for sure magkakaroon sila ng idea kung sino yung hindi taga doon na magsistay. Kasi hindi naman kaagad ba sabi pa nga napakaliit lang nung tao.
Baka duman lang siya tapos
sumakay ng train. Yun na tayo, tapos umalis ka
agad. Di ko alam.
Parang ganun din na.
Pwede lang kasi
so lang dito is paano niya pinipili yung mga target para wala lang.
Kung sino lang.
Yung bukas yung pinto, pasukan nila.
Sino yung hindi nakalak. Ikot-ikot siya sa mga towns.
Trip ko yung bahay na to.
Ito nga yung Though there were similarities in these gruesome killings, interest in the serial killer theory soon faded and was largely forgotten. So, hindi rin
in-entertain
yung factor na may serial killer on the loose. Every stranger and transient to the town, yun nga,
natin.
were also suspects. One such man was Andy Sawyer.
Kapatid ni Tom.
Tsaka yung classmate ko, si Berlin.
Oh.
Baka rin to eh.
Hi, Seg.
Ay!
Wala lang, shout out.
Shout out lang.
Bakit ba?
Ay, naalala mo lang si Sir.
Naalala ko lang na Seg.
Kaduty natin. A transient that moved from job to job. He gained temporary work in the Burlington Railroad on the very morning of the murder. According to the Rail Q, he purchased a newspaper that headlined the murders and was very much interested in it. The crew also complained that Sawyer slept with his clothes on and with an axe close by and was a loner. Afterward, he talked much about the Villisca murders and whether or not a killer had been apprehended. He also told the crew foreman that he had been in Villisca that Sunday night and was afraid he may be a suspect, which was why he left. ano po, parang napaparanoid.
Nagparanoid siya. Ikaw ba naman may katabing axe sa pagtulog?
Tulog baka So, the cruise foreman, Thomas Dyer,
Ooh.
si Dyer,
Amelia.
Amelia Dyer, was suspicious and turned him over to the sheriff on June 18, 1912. The foreman would later testify that before he turned Sawyer over to the authorities, that he walked up behind him and Sawyer was rubbing his head with both hands. Then all of a sudden he jumped up and said to himself, "I will cut your goddamn heads off," while striking motions with his axe and hitting piles in front of him.
Baka naman kasi niya ginulat. Uy! Ganun.
Baka alam. Nagsasalita lang siya sa kanila, sa
Kasi-
sarili niya.
Kasi
Tapos-
nga niya, di ba? He walked up behind him.
Hindi. Parang narinig lang niya. Tapos si Sawyer parang tumalon tapos sinabi sa sarili niya na, "I will cut your goddamn heads off," while striking motions with his axe. Parang nagsasalita lang sa kanya, sarili niya.
Pinapractice niya.
Oo, parang nagpa-practice siya. Hindi ko alam. Though Sawyer's name often came up in grand jury testimonies, he was eventually dismissed, and it was found that he was actually in Osceola, Iowa on the night of the murder.
May alibi pa eh.
May alibi. The alibi was extremely tight as he had been arrested for vagrancy 11 p.m. that evening. Uy, so meron pala siyang ibang ginagawang kababalaghan.
May ano talaga eh. May evidence pa eh.
As the investigation continued, the focus turned to locals in the community and a number of possible suspects emerged. The speculation of the townspeople caused them to identify themselves by who they believe committed the crime. Friendships ito si Marites. Si Marites yung nagpa-sabay nito eh. Friendships became strained and in many cases irretrievably broken. Sabi
ng yung mga magkakaibigan niya yung ina nila eh. Baka siya na yung pumatay.
Tapos yung isa naman kay Pabibo sasabihin
Oo
sa
nga.
police, siya yung sinabi siya yung nagsabi sa akin si Marites.
Baka pinatay niya daw eh, sabi.
Nagka-chismisan. Maliit lang kasi yung community nila. So masasabi talagang one of the first suspects was Sarah's brother-in-law, Lee Van Gilder, who was the ex-husband of her sister Mary. Ibang sister. A man prone to violence and having previous brushes with the law, there was bad blood between him and the family. Van Gilder, however, was later cleared. Looking at motive, the authorities began to investigate Frank P. F. Jones, a prominent businessman and Iowa state senator. 4 years before he opened his own business, Josiah Moore had worked for Frank Jones as a top salesman in Jones of Villisca, a hardware and implement store. In 1907, Josiah left the company and started a competing business, taking with him a coveted John Deere franchise.
Ooh.
The two became bitter enemies, so so that by 1910 they wouldn't speak and would cross the street to avoid meeting with each other. So, not believing that Jones would commit the crime by himself, investigator began to look at a man by the name of William Mansfield, who from a tip, Marites, had learned he may have been hired by Senator Frank F. Jones to murder the Moore family. In July 1916, Mansfield was arrested in Kansas City. And extradited to Iowa to face a Montgomery County grand jury.
Grand duty.
Grand jury.
May pakain no?
Yun eh, mga kasama yung mga ka-intern. Local opinion anticipated Mansfield would be bound over for trial. The jury refused to indict him on grounds that his alibi checked out. In the meantime, Frank Jones lost his re-election as a senator but was never charged with a crime. Another suspect was the Reverend George Kelly, who was a traveling minister who happened to be teaching at the Children's Day services at the
Traveling baka siya yun.
Parang punta siya dito.
Baka yun na yung ano.
Ginagawa. Yung ano niya, yung modus operandi niya. Which the Moore family attended on June 9, 1912. The tiny, nervous, bird-like creature who had a reputation of being unbalanced.
Ano namang ano yan?
Yung
Description.
Hindi.
Bird-like.
Bird-like. So para yung ano niya, yung ilong niya mataas. Tapos, and perhaps a pedophile and had left Villisca very early on the day of the murder. It was not these facts, however, that led to his being investigated. Rather, it was an obsession that he had with the murder that turned law enforcement's eyes on him. His obsession resulted in a stream-long, rambling letters sent to the state and local investigators, private detectives, and relatives of the victims. On his next preaching visit to Villisca 2 weeks after the crime, he arranged to stay over on Monday and visited the murder house. Within a month, officials began to investigate him, finding out that he had been seen peeking into a woman's bedrooms just days before the murder and had been observed in several towns prowling streets late at night. He had also made specific requests that young women post nude for him and on at least 3 occasions. They also cited a disturbed mental state, including his sexual obsession and a bloody shirt he sent to be laundered the week after the murder.
Ooh. So medyo maraming mga evidence na pointing towards sa natin sa dito sa robber sa pedophile na na reverend.
Kelly was arrested on April 1917. As the trial drew near, state officials decided on one final all-out effort to get him to confess. After a long evening of interrogation, Kelly dictated a confession on August 31, 1917. Wait.
May confession pa na naganap.
Inilit to eh. Parang tinorture yata si George Kelly. Kelly dictated a confession on August 31, 1917. The confession stated that he had difficulty sleeping the murder night and went for a walk, during which he spied the Stillinger girls getting ready for bed through the window. He then went on to say that he heard the Lord's voice commanding him to suffer the children to come unto me.
Ano daw? Free them from their suffering.
Tapos pagpunta yun na daw. Sana kunin ka doon dito. Padala mo na sila sa akin. The trial began on September 4, 1917 but was dismissed on September 28 as the jury was deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second trial in November resulted in Kelly being acquitted for all charges. By the time the trial began, a majority of Montgomery County citizens were convinced that Kelly was being framed as a conspiracy led by Frank Jones. They believed Jones had tried to use money and influence to pack the jury. Another suspect was Henry Lee Moore, no relation to Josiah, and who was thought to be a serial killer. Several months after the Villisca murder, he was convicted to the murder of his mother and grandmother with an axe.
Ooh.
He was also suspected of the killings in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and
So, yun.
elsewhere
May
in
parang
Paola,
ano.
Kansas.
Oh, dito. Ito nga yung ano, yung parang
Siya yung nahanap na eh. Oh,
dito, ano, sa serial killing.
Na-solve yung serial killings sa previous na mga family murders. The cases were similar enough that all were committed by the same person. However, this was never proven. In the end, the police and investigators gave up in 1917. 1917 yun, yung last straw nila kay George Kelly na para mahanap yung ano, yung katotohanan, pero wala eh. The murders remain unsolved and the killer unpunished. Today, the remains of those murdered by the mysterious axeman lie in the Villisca Cemetery. The murder house continues to stand.
Oo. At saka ano pa to, parang naging hindi, pwede mong puntahan yung ano, yung place.
So, museum, parang museum siya. Mausoleum. Museum lang.
Attraction. Local attraction. Anong local? Kasi may nakalagay doon, no, Villisca family murder doon sa front ng bahay nila. Tapos may I was searching sa ano, sa gagawing thumbnail sa ano, sa video. Yun, may mga nagpi-picture doon sa bahay. Pero walang picture sa loob. Sa labas lang. Like picture doon sa labas, may dala silang mga axe.
May axe talaga.
Oh, like ano lang, parang props ganun. Yung mga nagpapapicture.
I think parang ano yan, insulto yan sa namatay. Magdadala ka ng
Kaya yung ano lang dito is
kami nagbebenta ba doon ng axe? Ay, get your axe.
baka ano lang, baka props like magkano ka. Babayad ka, pwede mong gamitin yung props na yun. Parang ganun. Well, ano lang dito is syempre at that time is hindi pa ganun ka-sophisticated yung ano, yung pagka-handle ng mga investigate.
I think more on
like,
ano sila eh, more on torturing.
At saka yung ano siguro, at that time, if hindi ka talaga caught red-handed, hindi ganun kadali ma-solve yung mga crimes. Like, I don't know, hindi ko lang alam.
Mostly ng mga ano natin, yung mga serial killers natin. Parang ganun.
Parang, lalo na yung mga matatagal na talaga. Yung
sila
mga
kagaya si Amelia Dyer. Si Amelia Dyer, hindi yun mahuhuli.
wala talaga
Wala
yung
siyang
mga evidence na
mga tinapon niya. Sino pa ba? Ito, yun, tapos meron din tayong mga serial killers na hindi nahuli kasi yung
nga,
times
dahil,
nila kulang.
yung ano din, scientific approach siguro
Kulang na.
ng mga police people or ng mga mga parang ganun. So hindi rin natin sila masisisi.
Na tsaka ano eh, parang
hindi pa sila ganun ka hindi pa sila ganun ka.
Ito nga si ano eh,
Kagaling.
pinilit eh. Parang pinilit na
Well, meron naman mga ganun talaga eh. Like pag ataw dito, if yung mga policies na ano talaga nape-pressure na. Like naghahanap sila ng pwedeng ma-point out na siya yun. Like,
pero kasi
kahit hindi naman well, yung mga evidence naman is meron din
Kelly, pero
towards him. Pero like yun, parang ganun. Parang sa recent times may mga ganung mga ano din, mga instances like well
mga wrongfully
convicted. Diba? May mga ganung ano din eh. May mga ganung instances din talaga eh.
Tingnan mo yung mata. Nasa
Speaking of yung ano, di ba yung naalala mo yung ano, pinakita kong video sa'yo kagabi? Like yung babae yung lalaki inagawan ng baril. Dun sa, kumakain tayo, like may
yung ano, nakatalikod.
Ayan, nakatalikod. Alam ba yung ano, yung pinatay niya? Yung kapatid niya lang din. Binaril niya yung kapatid niya, yung
tapos,
babae.
Parang babae yung pinatay niya.
Oo, yung ate niya. Tapos yung ano, parang family problem.
Family dispute.
Wala, nakita ko lang kanina. May interview. Nahuli. Tapos na-identify. So yun. Dahil dito sa episode natin to. Napakabilis like 49 minutes pa lang.
Kasi ano kasi siya eh.
Brief lang yung
brief yung mga details, tsaka hindi naman sobrang ano eh. Parang wala siyang sobrang so unfortunate family na napatay.
Hindi ko lang alam if
hindi na
sa mga sa lugar natin may mga ganyan din ba? Like, or dahil sa mostly nang nahahanap natin mga cases is sa states ganun.
Parang
Meron din ata ano naman dito eh, pero hindi ganun ka brutally ano. Yung
tsaka tapos hindi mo.
or hindi lang siya ganun ka tawag dito. Like, if nanonood siguro tayo ng mga soko-soko ganun.
Meron yan.
Oh, parang madami din eh.
Marami yan. Pero hindi siya, I think magandang ano yan sa susunod natin episode. Mga Pinoy naman.
Mga Pinoy naman yung ano natin.
Hanap tayo ng Pinoy. Mag-research tayo sa Wikipedia. Unsolved cases in the Philippines.
Well, wala pa naman. Hindi ko alam pang ilang episode na to. Maybe matatapos na ata tayo. 10 episodes lang naman yung gagawin natin.
Tapos moving on na tayo sa bago.
Ibang topic naman yung gagawin natin.
Comment nyo sa amin kung ano yung baga, parang gusto nyo maging bagong series na gagawin. Pero
What if murder?
what if murder?
Murder na what if?
Paano kung mamamatay? Anong mangyayari? Parang
Pag pinatay ka.
So anyway, that was our episode
For sa week na to. Anong week
for
ba?
today.
For
Hindi namin sasabihin.
sasabihin kung kailan.
Kasi para next ay
Actually, parang next week pa to.
para
eh.
next week pa to.
Ay, hindi. Ano ba? Anong araw ngayon? Basta next week pa to lalaban.
Anyways, Friday. Friday
Friday.
tayo nag-ano palagi. Always.
So, yun. That was the episode, guys. Hopefully, na-enjoy niyo yung episode natin to. And, tsaka, yun din
Check
naman
our
na.
socials always.
Follow us sa mga natin, sa mga social media accounts na wala namang nagpa-follow. Wala nagbabago.
Walang ano eh.
Lang, wala. Ginagawa lang namin to purely of
Of our
tawag dito.
of
Ano
our
ba to?
passion.
Passion.
For Christ. So, ano lang. Basta, pero marami pa rin may nakikinig sa atin.
Sana may
Spotify,
nakikinig pa rin sa Spotify.
Tapos meron pa rin nanonood sa YouTube.
Meron din, like may nag-comment niya kanina, like, pero hindi ko alam ba't nawala yung comment niya.
Ay, tinanggal. Grabe.
Tapos parang foreigner yung nag-comment dun sa episode. Tapos nakikita ko lang na may nag-comment pero wala na yung comment niya dun. I don't know kung bakit nawala.
Baka, sayang. Dapat naanin natin. So anyway, keep on listening to us kahit anong ginagawa. Thank you.
So yan, this was the podcast, everybody. We're your host, I'm Marky.
I'm Rick. Para tayo nagmukbang. So from the first episode.